The stale scent of aged paper and dust filled the cramped archive room at the back of the town library, where Thomas Graves sat hunched over a rickety wooden table. A single desk lamp cast a narrow pool of yellow light, its glow struggling to penetrate the dimness that clung stubbornly to the corners. Thomas's fingers trembled slightly as he carefully unfolded an old photograph, its creases brittle with age and edges frayed from years of handling. The image was faded but unmistakable. The hotel at the end of the photograph loomed in the background, its crumbling silhouette veiled in mist and shadow. Around it, ghostly shapes flickered, blurred figures whose faces seemed both distant and achingly familiar. Evelyn Marsh stood close by, her eyes reflecting the soft lamplight as she peered over Thomas's shoulder. "I never thought I'd see this again," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "This photograph has been tucked away in the archive for decades, forgotten by all but a few." Thomas nodded, his breath shallow. "It's more than just an image," he said. "There's something hidden here, something they didn't want anyone to find." Together, they examined the photograph's margins, where faint, almost imperceptible markings traced delicate patterns around the edges. Evelyn pulled out a magnifying glass from her bag, her hands steady despite the growing tension. As they deciphered the cryptic symbols, a narrative began to emerge, a story encoded in light and shadow, a secret message left behind by someone desperate to warn others. The symbols spoke of a curse rooted in despair and nostalgia, feeding on those drawn to the hotel's spectral allure. It described a liminal space where time warped and memories twisted, trapping souls in a nightmarish cycle. Thomas's heart pounded as the full weight of the revelation pressed down on him. The curse was not merely a legend. It was a malevolent force bound to the hotel's very foundation, sustained by the sorrow and longing of the lost. Outside, the coastal wind whispered through the cracked window panes, carrying with it the faint scent of salt and decay. The sound seemed to echo Thomas's mounting dread, a reminder that the past was never truly past. The photograph in his hands was more than a clue, it was a key, a final testament from those who had vanished, but whose stories still lingered in the shadows. Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and resolve. "This changes everything," she said softly. "We can't ignore what we've found. The town's silence about the hotel isn't just superstition, it's a desperate attempt to keep the curse contained." Thomas swallowed hard, the familiar ache of loss tightening in his chest. Memories of his missing friend flickered through his mind, friends who had vanished, leaving behind only photographs, with the hotel faintly etched in the background. Now the truth was within reach, but so too was the danger looming ever closer. He reached out, tracing the hotel's outline in the photograph with a trembling finger. "I have to confront it," he whispered. "I have to understand it fully before it claims anyone else." Evelyn nodded, her expression grim but supportive. "We'll do whatever it takes to help you," she promised. The room seemed to grow colder as Thomas carefully packed away the photograph, the weight of its secrets settling heavily on his shoulders. The hotel was no longer just a backdrop in a series of tragic images, it was a living nightmare, a prison of memories and despair that needed to be broken. As they stepped out of the library into the chill evening air, the fading light cast long shadows across the town's streets. The hotel's silhouette still haunted the horizon, a silent sentinel watching from the edge of the world. Thomas's resolve hardened. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it head-on, armed now with the knowledge the last photograph had revealed. Yet beneath his determination, a flicker of unease remained, a whisper that the hotel's curse was far from defeated, and that the shadows still waited patiently for their next victim. The morning sun filtered weakly through the tall, narrow windows of the town library, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floor. Evelyn Marsh sat at an antique oak desk, her hands gently sifting through a pile of Thomas Graves's notes and photographs. The air smelled faintly of old paper and sea salt, a reminder of the town's unyielding proximity to the restless ocean. Her glasses caught the flicker of the desk lamp as she leaned closer, eyes narrowing in concentration. Each note, each image was a thread in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. She carefully spread out photographs of the faded hotel, its ghostly silhouette always lurking in the background of the missing person's last images. Names and dates were scribbled across the margins of Thomas's meticulous notes. As she connected the dots, the dark history of the hotel began to take shape more clearly than ever before, a history that the town had long buried beneath layers of silence and superstition. Across town, Detective Mark Halstead sat in the cluttered office of the local police station, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He held a faded photograph of the hotel, the edges worn and curling with age. His brow furrowed as he studied the image, a mixture of skepticism and reluctant intrigue clouding his expression. Duty demanded he find logical explanations, yet the evidence Thomas had uncovered gnawed at his rational mind. The disappearances, the hotel's repeated presence, there was a pattern too persistent to ignore. Halstead glanced at a map pinned to the wall behind his desk, marked with locations tied to the missing persons. He ran his fingers along the lines connecting each site, the hotel always looming at the center like a dark nexus. A sigh escaped his lips. The weight of the investigation pressed heavily, but for the first time, the notions of the supernatural seemed less far-fetched. Meanwhile, Thomas sat quietly in a small seaside cafe, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. His eyes flicked between the window and the worn map spread before him on the table. Across from him, Evelyn and Halstead spoke in hushed tones, their voices threading together the fractured pieces of the mystery. The tension was palpable, but beneath it lay a fragile hope that their combined efforts might finally pierce the shroud of fear enveloping the town. Evelyn's voice was steady as she recounted historical facts and personal anecdotes uncovered in her research. Halstead listened intently, occasionally nodding as he reconciled her findings with the evidence from his investigation. Thomas felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in weeks: optimism. The breakthrough came sooner than expected. Word spread through the town, and a hesitant crowd gathered in the local community hall. Faces were etched with lines of worry and exhaustion, eyes darting nervously as Evelyn and Halstead took the stage. The library historian and the pragmatic detective stood side by side, presenting the evidence that Thomas had painstakingly compiled. Photographs, timelines, and eyewitness accounts wove a narrative impossible to dismiss. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the oppressive barrier of denial began to crumble. The hotel's spectral presence was no longer just a whispered myth, but a tangible menace linked directly to the disappearances. Some residents averted their gaze, unwilling to confront the chilling truth, while others exchanged glances that spoke of relief, the shared burden of fear finally given voice. Outside, the salty breeze stirred the curtains in the open windows, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the promise of change. The town stood on the cusp of awakening, its collective silence fractured by the threads of connection woven by Thomas, Evelyn, and Halstead. Yet beneath the tentative hope lay the ever-present shadow of the hotel, its faded walls still watching, waiting. In the quiet moments after the meeting, Thomas retreated to the shoreline. The waves lapped gently against the rocks, reflecting the soft pink hues of the setting sun. His mind churned with questions and fears, but also a burgeoning resolve. The curse's grip had weakened tonight, not vanquished, but fractured. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, the path forward was illuminated. As darkness settled over the town, the hotel remained a silent sentinel on the horizon, its spectral silhouette faint but unmistakable. The threads of connection had been woven. Now, the town must face the past it had long tried to forget. Thomas's journey was no longer solitary. United by truth and determination, they would confront the lingering shadows and the haunting legacy of the hotel together. And yet, in the depths of his heart, Thomas knew the curse was not so easily undone. The photographer's whisper was growing louder, beckoning him back into the mist where memory and nightmare intertwined. The air within the hotel's walls was thick and suffocating, laden with the salt and rot of the sea that clung like a damp shroud. Thomas Graves stepped cautiously into the grand foyer, the floorboards creaking beneath his worn boots as shadows shifted unnaturally around him. The faintest pulse of light, or was it breath, seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the building were alive, exhaling centuries of despair in a slow, mournful sigh. Around him, the atmosphere vibrated with an eerie symphony, distant laughter, fragmented and hollow, tangled with the soft murmur of sobbing voices. Each whisper carried a weight, a name he recognized, a lost soul ensnared by the hotel's curse. Thomas's heart hammered as he strained to distinguish the voices, their sorrowful tones weaving through the silence like a spectral siren's call. He could feel the hotel's presence pressing in, tendrils of shadow curling at the edges of his vision, beckoning and threatening in equal measure. His breath caught, the cold seeping into his bones as memories stirred in the depths of his mind, fragments of his own loss, the friend he'd never saved. The faces trapped forever in fading photographs. Moving forward, he entered a dim corridor where time seemed fractured. Along the peeling wallpaper, illusory figures took shape, his lost friend, the missing victims, their forms flickering like images warped by water. Their eyes held a profound sadness, voices trembling as they whispered pleas and warnings that gnawed at his resolve. The floor beneath him rippled like a disturbed pond, the edges of reality bending and warping. Thomas stumbled, caught in a maelstrom of recollections folding over themselves. The past, present, and future collided in a kaleidoscope of despair, threatening to pull him under into a vortex where hope was but a distant echo. Then, from the heart of the hotel, the malevolent force revealed itself. A shadowy tempest roiled in the darkness, a swirling mass of anguish and lost memories. It stretched spectral tendrils toward him, clawing at his mind, dredging up his deepest fears and the sharp sting of grief he carried like a wound that would not heal. Walls melted and twisted into nightmarish visions, desolate landscapes of forgotten time, where faces from the town's dark history flickered in and out of existence. Thomas felt the crushing weight of despair, his sanity fraying as the hotel sought to claim him as it had so many others. Yet, amid the chaos, a fragile ember of defiance kindled within him. Gritting his teeth, he fixed his gaze on the swirling mass, refusing to yield. His voice broke the oppressive silence, speaking words that wove through the darkness, words of hope, of release, of the strength to confront sorrow rather than be consumed by it. Light fractured the shadows, scattering the tendrils that sought to bind him. The hotel trembled, its spectral grip faltering as the trapped souls stirred, their voices rising in a chorus of longing and farewell. A path glimmered before Thomas, a way out of the nightmare, but the struggle was far from over. Breathless and battered, Thomas took a tentative step forward, the hotel's oppressive gloom retreating just enough to reveal the fragile boundary between worlds. The abyss had been faced, and though darkness still loomed, a flicker of hope remained, a slender thread upon which the fate of many now hung. As the echoes of the cursed presence faded into the distance, Thomas knew the final confrontation was but a prelude. The true battle to break the cycle and free the lost souls remained, but for the first time, he glimpsed a future beyond the hotel's haunted grasp, a future where memory and loss might coexist without devouring the living. With a steadying breath, he pressed onward, the weight of the past still heavy but no longer insurmountable. The abyss had been faced, and though shadows lingered, the dawn was coming. Thomas Graves stood at the threshold of the hotel's grand hall, the air around him thick with a suffocating stillness that seemed to press against his chest like an invisible weight. The walls, once elegant with faded floral wallpaper, shimmered and twisted before his eyes, as if the building itself breathed in time with his ragged heartbeat. In his hand, he gripped a crumpled photograph, a relic from the hotel's tragic past. depicting the original owner and his family, their faces frozen in a moment of despair and loss. The ghosts of the lost souls swirled around him, their translucent forms flickering like candle flames caught in a gust. Their eyes, hollow and mournful, pleaded silently for release. Thomas's breath hitched as he forced himself to meet their gaze, drawing strength from their collective suffering. "I won't let you suffer here any longer," he whispered, voice trembling but resolute. The hotel responded with a low, guttural groan, the floor beneath his feet seeming to ripple like a disturbed pond. Shadows stretched and recoiled, tendrils of darkness reaching out as if to snatch him away. But Thomas planted his feet firmly, raising the photograph high. The image began to glow faintly, a pale blue light emanating from the paper itself, illuminating the peeling paint and warped wood around him. A sudden rush of wind tore through the hall, carrying with it the scent of salt and old wood, and the anguished whispers of the trapped souls crescendoed into a haunting chorus. Light burst forth from the photograph, flooding the room with an ethereal glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness. The ghostly figures began to shimmer, their forms becoming less distinct as they slowly dissolved into the mist, their faces relaxing into expressions of peace. Tears streamed down Thomas's face as he watched them fade, the weight on his soul lifting ever so slightly. But the victory was not without cost. His legs buckled, sending him crashing to the floor, sweat mingling with the cold tears on his cheeks. His chest heaved as he fought to catch his breath, the hotel's silence returning in full force, oppressive and heavy like a shroud. Through the haze of exhaustion, Thomas felt the lingering presence of the curse, a stubborn specter refusing to be fully vanquished. The hotel's shadow flickered in the distance, its dark silhouette warped and trembling against the swirling mist outside. A faint whisper echoed through the corridors, a mournful lament that chilled him to the bone. He struggled to his feet, every muscle protesting, his mind racing with the knowledge that the battle was far from over. The curse had been weakened, yes, but it still pulsed with a malevolent life, waiting for the next soul to ensnare. Thomas knew that exposing the hotel's secrets to the world was only the beginning. As he staggered towards the exit, the photograph fluttered from his grasp, landing on the cracked floorboards. The faint blue glow pulsed once more before fading into darkness, a silent promise that the souls freed today were not alone in their suffering. Outside, the dawn was beginning to break, casting pale light over the misty shoreline. Thomas paused for a moment, the salty air filling his lungs, mingling with the taste of iron and fear. He was scarred and broken, but alive, and for the first time in months, hope flickered within him, fragile but real. Yet, as he glanced back at the looming silhouette of the hotel, he knew the shadows it cast would haunt him forever. The curse's grip had been challenged, but it endured, an unyielding testament to the power of memory, loss, and the darkest corners of the human soul. With resolve hardening in his chest, Thomas stepped into the light of the new day, ready to face whatever lingering darkness awaited him. The fight was not over, but he would face it head-on, armed with the truth and the unbreakable will to see the lost souls finally at peace. But deep within the hotel's fading walls, the cursed presence stirred, a whisper on the wind promising that the nightmare was far from finished. Thomas Graves gasped for air as he pushed through the warped doorway, stumbling onto the cold and even ground beyond the hotel's threshold. The mist clung thick and heavy, swirling in eddies around his feet, cold and damp against his worn shoes. The salty tang of the sea filled his nostrils, sharp and bracing after the stale, suffocating atmosphere inside the hotel. He coughed violently, clutching his side where bruises bloomed beneath his worn jacket. The lingering pain a stark reminder of the ordeal he had just survived. The sky was a pale wash of grays and muted golds, the first tentative light of dawn breaking over the horizon. Thomas's breath formed ragged clouds as he exhaled, the chill of the morning seeping into his bones. Somewhere above, a gull cried out, its lonely call echoing over the restless surf, a haunting soundtrack to his battered emergence. For a moment, he simply stood there, unsteady, the cold wind tugging at his dark hair and scruff-covered face. His eyes fixed on the shifting silhouette of the hotel behind him. It was a ghostly vision, fading at the edges in the dense fog that wrapped the shore like a shroud. The building seemed less a structure now than a living entity, breathing softly in the mist, its windows dark and hollow like the eyes of a hollowed skull. The silence around it was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic crash of waves and the distant, intermittent cries of seabirds. Thomas's hands trembled as he reached up, wiping grime and spectral residue from his brow. His fingers shook, not just from cold but from the weight of exhaustion, and something deeper, an invisible scar etched deeply into his soul. He could still feel the hotel's grasp lingering, a cold pressure at the base of his neck, the whisper of lost voices circling just beyond hearing. The memories twisted in his mind, mingling with his own grief, threatening to pull him back into the nightmare he had fought so hard to escape. Yet, standing there on the misty shoreline, Thomas felt a fragile spark of hope kindle within him. He pulled the battered notebook from his coat pocket, the pages dog-eared and stained, each word a testament to his relentless pursuit of truth. His fingers, stained with ink and dirt, moved almost automatically as he began jotting down the fragmented revelations, the curse's nature, the hotel's cursed grasp on nostalgia and despair, the stories of the lost souls trapped within its spectral walls. His voice, hoarse and low, whispered against the crashing waves, fragments of thoughts and memories, a litany of warnings and truths that he vowed to share. The hotel might still stand on the horizon, a silent sentinel cloaked in mist and sorrow, but Thomas was no longer a prisoner to its curse. He was a witness, a bearer of stories that might yet break the cycle. But doubt gnawed at him relentlessly. Could his escape sever the malevolent ties that bound the hotel to the town's dark past? Or was the curse a shadow that would forever trail him, lurking just beyond the edge of vision? The weight of uncertainty pressed down as heavily as the salt-laden air. As dawn deepened, the town began to stir, the normal rhythms of life unfurling beneath the watchful gaze of the hotel. Thomas tucked his notebook away, pulling his collar tight against the chill. His eyes lingered once more on the spectral edifice, its presence a haunting echo in the distance. With slow, deliberate steps, he turned toward the town, each footfall a promise to uncover, to reveal, and to confront the lingering power of memory and loss that gripped the coastal community. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by grief and fear, but Thomas Graves carried with him the fragile light of understanding, the hope that even in the darkest corners, truth might yet hold sway. The hotel loomed silently behind him, a faded shadow in the mist, its curse unresolved but challenged. And as the waves whispered against the shore, Thomas's journey continued, a solitary figure haunted but unbroken, determined to reclaim the lost and break the silence once and for all. The town was quieter now. The relentless tide of disappearances that had darkened the coastal community's spirit for so long had finally ebbed away. Where once there had been whispered fears and furtive glances toward the distant horizon, now there was cautious breathing space, fragile, tentative, yet unmistakably present. Thomas Graves stood at the center of this uneasy calm, his figure silhouetted against the pale dawn. The mist still clung to the shoreline, wrapping the world in a cool, damp embrace, as if reluctant to let go of the secrets it had held for decades. Inside the town library, Evelyn Marsh and Detective Mark Halstead sat side by side at a heavy oak table, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows upon the walls lined with dusty tomes. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and faint salt from the sea breeze that slipped through a cracked window. Between them lay Thomas' meticulously kept notes, photographs, journal entries, and fragments of half-remembered legends, each piece a thread in the tapestry of the town's haunted past. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, her gaze steady yet heavy with the weight of what they had uncovered. It's almost overwhelming to think how much suffering this place has borne, she murmured, tracing a finger along a faded photograph of the hotel. So many lives. Swallowed by that place. Halstead folded his arms, a crease of skepticism softening his otherwise pragmatic features. I never thought I'd find myself entertaining the supernatural, but the evidence speaks for itself. Something unnatural was at work here. And yet, Evelyn added quietly, it's the human element that ties it all together. Despair, loss, the inability to let go. The hotel feeds on those emotions. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft creak of the library door opening. Thomas entered, his face drawn but resolute. The disappearances have stopped, he said, voice low but carrying a spark of hope. Whatever the hotel was, its hold has weakened. Halstead nodded slowly. Your confrontation with that cursed presence, it seems to have broken the cycle. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't the end. Thomas took a seat, rubbing the back of his neck. The hotel is still there, just beyond the horizon, a silent sentinel. Even if the curse is broken, some part of it lingers. Outside, the town began to stir. In the town hall, a small gathering of residents exchanged guarded stories. They spoke of loss and survival, of nights haunted by dreams and whispers, and of the tentative peace that now allowed them to breathe without the constant shadow of fear. Their voices were soft but resolute, a chorus of healing amidst the scars left behind. At the police station, Halstead stepped out into the morning light. He looked toward the distant outline of the hotel, its faded silhouette barely visible through the haze. The building seemed less menacing now, more a relic of a forgotten nightmare than an active threat. Yet that ancient presence was etched into the very fabric of the town, a reminder of the thin veil that separated reality from the unknown. Thomas, meanwhile, walked the shoreline, the wet sand cool beneath his feet. The sea whispered its eternal song, a timeless lullaby that seemed to speak of endings and beginnings. His mind wandered back over the months of obsession, fear, and revelation. He had confronted horrors beyond human comprehension and emerged scarred but alive. The price had been high, his peace shattered, his soul marked by the shadows of the lost, but the truth was now laid bare. He paused, looking out over the water where the first rays of sunlight fractured the mist. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the hotel waited silent, watchful, perhaps dormant, but never gone. The photograph taken of him earlier that day, by an unknowing passerby, would capture that lingering presence. A faded spectre on the edge of the frame, a whisper of the past that refused to be silenced. As the town slowly healed, its people cautious yet hopeful, Thomas resolved to keep watch. The line between the rational and the supernatural had been crossed, and though the immediate threat had passed, the memory of the hotel and its cursed imagery would remain. Some stories, he knew, were never truly finished, they only waited for the next chapter to begin. And the photograph's whisper echoed on, a haunting melody of nostalgia and loss, urging vigilance for the shadows that might one day return.